By Brooks on Fancred. Do it every day, noon Eastern time here on the Fancred mobile streaming app and platform. Thank you for downloading us onto your phone, tablet. And again, Monday through Friday, we're doing things on this show you're not going to see anywhere else. That's kind of the whole damn point. And if you're familiar with Sports by Brooks, which of course you are, if you're watching the show, then you already know that we're going to be giving you stuff that you're not getting. You're not getting the straight dope from sports media. And that's what we've created here. That's what we're going to continue to do. Our producer, as always, is Cam Smith. And coming up, a thrill for me to have Howard Bryan on, celebrated best-selling author of the books The Heritage, Sisters and Champions, and The Last Hero, with the latter being the biography, a scholarly biography of Henry Aaron, Sisters and Champions, about the Williams sisters. And he's got a book coming out in January called Full Dissident, Notes from an Uneven Playing Field. If you watched ESPN this week, you saw him on with First Take and on Outside the Lines. And he is the definitive chronicler of the Colin Kaepernick workout, tryout, combine situation. So really, really excited to have him coming on the show later on this hour. And we'll talk to him about Kaepernick. We'll do a deep dive on that. I want to hear about his book and also get his thoughts on, of course, the Myles Garrett, Mason Rudolph thing, which we're going to jump into in 1 second. Got an interesting guest coming up. I wanted to do something going into the weekend for college football, with the college football playoffs becoming more and more relevant, and of course the CFP rankings themselves. And we have arguably the definitive guy when it comes to college football analytics. His name is Adam McClintock. His handle on Twitter is CFP_professor, college football playoff professor. And he is the guy who runs Matrix Analytical College Football Analytics. And he's going to simplify the college football playoff rankings for us and really clear things up. That's why we're having him on. He's one of the very, very few guys, if not the only person, who can do that. Simple stuff. It's not simple to me. It's not simple to you, but it is to him. And it's all about mathematics. And that's what we're going to get into coming up later in the show. And then another blockbuster scoop from a friend of the show, Bobby Burak, from The Big Lead, about Paul Feinbaum, the SEC Network host, longtime radio host, and college football commentator. Paul Feinbaum, big scoop about him from Bobby Burak. We're going to be visiting with Bobby about that. Bobby's got a lot of stuff in this news story about Paul Feinbaum that's really amazing as it pertains to the agency business, creative artists agency, that you normally don't see inside baseball, but fascinating stuff when it comes to sports business. And we'll also talk to him about an article that he wrote about the NBA ratings that came out earlier this week, and get his take on the situation with Stephen A. Smith at the moment. But first, before we go any further, I wanted to jump into the Mason Rudolph, Myles Garrett thing. As we were on the air yesterday, that whole situation broke out when we found out that Myles Garrett had accused Mason Rudolph, as part of his appeal to his suspension with the National Football League. Myles Garrett had accused Mason Rudolph of a racial slur, and that is allegedly what prompted Garrett to do something that we've been told over and over and over again by people who know him, have relationships with him prior to the situation, is so out of character. And in the aftermath of that, there has been a full-blown nuclear war waged against Myles Garrett, of course, Browns defensive lineman who struck Mason Rudolph, the quarterback for the Steelers, over the head with Rudolph's helmet in an incident last week. And I do mean it's been an apocalypse dropped on Myles Garrett for making that accusation. Myles Garrett, though, released a statement. Again, this was when we were actually on the air, so we didn't have a chance to get to it right at that moment. But I want to address it, and I've been addressing it, as you probably know, on Twitter all damn day already. And we've got some really, really interesting stuff that I think really leaves open the possibility that there could be an issue here with the conclusion of the National Football League in its suspension remaining indefinite for Myles Garrett. But Garrett released this statement yesterday as follows, quote, "I was assured that the hearing for the appeal of his suspension in New York, I was assured that the hearing was spaced that afforded the opportunity to speak openly and honestly about the incident that led to my suspension. This was not meant for public dissemination, nor was it a convenient attempt to justify my actions or restore my image in the eyes of those who I disappointed. I know what I heard. Whether my opponent's comments were born out of frustration or ignorance, I cannot say. But his actions do not excuse my lack of restraint in the moment, and I truly regret the impact this has had on the league, the Browns, and our devoted fans," unquote. So that's Myles Garrett. Here is the response that really set off the firestorm aimed squarely at Garrett afterwards. This is from the agent of Mason Rudolph in the aftermath of Garrett's statement and, of course, the news, more specifically, the news that was reported out of ESPN, Adam Schefter and Josina Anderson reporting that Myles Garrett had made the accusation that a racial slur was hurled at him by Mason Rudolph, which is what prompted the entire episode, the helmet swinging and whatnot, and hitting him in the head with the helmet. So here is the agent of Mason Rudolph and his statement on behalf of Rudolph. Quote, according to ESPN, in his appeal, Myles Garrett falsely asserted that Mason Rudolph uttered a racial slur toward him prior to swinging a helmet at Mason's uncovered head in a desperate attempt to mitigate his suspension, lessen his suspension. This is a lie. This false allegation was never asserted by Garrett in the aftermath of the game, never suggested prior to the hearing, and conspicuously absent in the apology published by the Browns and adopted by Garrett. The malicious use of this wild and unfounded allegation is an assault on Mason's integrity, which is far worse than the physical assault witnessed on Thursday. This is reckless and shameful. We will have no further comment. And if Garrett made it up, certainly that response is understandable. I want to read a couple of things before we go on about Myles Garrett from the general manager of the Browns and the high school coach of Myles Garrett. This is from John Dorsey, the general manager of the Cleveland Browns. And this is in the aftermath of the report about the accusation made by Myles Garrett in the direction of Mason Rudolph. John Dorsey, the general manager of the Browns, quote, "As we've consistently stated, our organizational support for Myles will continue. He's a man of high..." Now remember, this is after the accusation by Garrett about the racial slur. The general manager of the Browns. I want you to listen to this very closely. "As we've consistently stated, our organizational support for Myles will continue. He's a man of high character and unquestionable integrity. He was open and honest with us about the incident from the start. He has taken accountability for his actions on Thursday night, and this situation will not define him. As an organization, our focus going forward remains on the task at hand, which is preparing for the Miami Dolphins." Unquestionable integrity. high character, open and honest. That's the way the general manager of the Cleveland Browns describes Myles Garrett. And he's not alone. He's not that's a universal description from other. I'm not going to go through the millions of people who have responded on Garrett's behalf. There have been many, many people, including his high school coach in Arlington, Texas, Bobby Wager, who told USA Today that the actions of Garrett against Rudolph were very, very out of character in my experience. Never seen him do that ever in practice or in a game. Never seen that in a game. Never seen that in his demeanor. That's not the Myles Garrett I've grown to love. That's his high school coach in Arlington, Texas, Bobby Wager. So there certainly seems to be a disconnect here. If he's this great guy with honesty, unquestionable integrity, right? How is it that the whole world is attacking him in this situation? It's an open question. And I do mean an open question. You never know that in watching national talk shows on ESPN, FS1, wherever, sports radio or local, right? Depends on where you are. But when it comes to local shows, I can't speak to the millions of local shows. But the national shows that I've heard have been universal, that Myles Garrett is lying. There was no racial slur. And if that's the case, it should be pretty easy to prove, because God knows we've got a lot of audio from NFL games, right? Right? God knows we mic up those centers and quarterbacks and linemen for the in-game broadcast. You can hear everything when it comes to the quarterback calling signals, when it comes to the sounds of the game. I mean, think about Monday Night Football, what ESPN does. But this was Fox, and Fox really pioneered audio as it pertains to the National Football League. And, of course, there's the NFL films aspect to it. So you would think if there was ever a sport, a league, a game, two teams where you had audio of the participants, prominent participants, Myles Garrett, star defensive lineman, right? Always in on the action, interacting with other people on the field who are probably mic'd up, like the quarterback of the opposing team, Mason Rudolph. If ever there was going to be people mic'd up, it would be people either involved with physical violence as it pertains to Myles Garrett and Mason Rudolph, or them themselves. Now, Rudolph was mic'd up and Garrett wasn't. But somehow we don't have audio, somehow, from Mason Rudolph. At least that's what the NFL is telling us at this time. And for that reason, that leaves a gaping hole in the NFL's investigation and rejection of the appeal to the suspension by Myles Garrett. Now, the NFL is indeed rejecting that appeal by Myles Garrett. And they're doing it on the basis of, we found no evidence, and anonymously sourced reports indicating that there is no audio available, recorded audio from the incident. Anonymously sourced reports coming from league sources. I'm going to drill down on this as we go along here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And I'm going to show you specifically what I mean by this and why the situation involving Garrett and Rudolph remains an open question. And it will always be an open question as to what was said between those two individuals before Myles Garrett did something that could not have been more out of character for him, according to the people who are closest to him and some people who aren't all that close to him. And when you look at Myles Garrett on Twitter, we've got tweets from Myles Garrett addressing the use of the N-word in the past. I was just pulling one up A very thoughtful, measured guy is Myles Garrett. Back in 2018, Myles Garrett himself tweeted of the N-word, "I'm tired of hearing the N-word or being referred to as one by anyone, no matter your race. Tired of the hard R or A argument." The hard R or A argument as it pertains to the N-word. "I'm surely tired of hearing people being offended by it when used by another ethnicity. If we don't want anyone using it, then we shouldn't." Pretty measured thought process there from Myles Garrett on Twitter in 2018. Now let's go out to the sports celebrity hotline here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Very, very happy to welcome in Howard Bryant. Howard Bryant of ESPN, NPR, celebrated and best-selling author. And really excited to have you, Howard. I can't thank you enough for taking the time today.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm sorry. I look like I'm sideways. I'm sitting on my bed. I'm not sideways. It
No,
just looks that way.
You look good, man. You look good. It's like an action shot.
Yeah, exactly.
So and of course, you've got a book coming out, The Full Dissident, and that's coming out January 21st, on sale, 2020. Before we jump into cap and whatnot, can you tell us a little bit about that book?
Yeah, well, the book is really just about where we are in today's culture. It's a book of essays really talking about how, whether we're talking about race or we're talking about economy, whether we're talking about where we're at in the White House, about how I think that a lot of people have sort of reached a point where we're asking ourselves questions about whether or not these systems work, and do we have other alternatives? Can we trust what we see anymore? As just regular, normal people are, when you look at wealth inequality, for example, is everyone being left behind? And if that is the case, what do we do about it? How do we navigate where we're at right now?
You have provided us with, I think, the definitive chronicle, at least on Twitter so far, of the Colin Kaepernick situation as it pertains to the workout recently in Atlanta. What was the motivation for you personally in doing this deep dive, which is ongoing, as I understand?
Well, my company asked me to go. ESPN called me and said they wanted to send me down there. It was a bit of a surprise, considering that, I mean, I think the entire story has been a surprise because no one really thought that the Kaepernick story was going anywhere. And this sort of came out of the blue. And then everybody mobilized. And I think as we got into Saturday, as we were working toward the workout, whether it was going to happen, whether it wasn't going to happen, there was just so much time in between. And I just sort of felt like, as a reporter, when you're on the field, you want to let out what you know. And as we sat around and then driving back and forth and waiting to find out what was happening, I just thought it made more sense, since I was actually there, to sort of just say what I knew. And it just sort of, it's an interesting place that we're in right now, because normally you would have to wait to go write a full story and find, and have it go through all the editing processes and everything else. But sitting in the bleachers waiting for Kaepernick to start throwing the football, I was like, let's start recapping what we know.
It is amazing when you think about the place that we're in right now, because that sort of thing can change history. Just what you're doing right there, right? That can change events.
Well, and I was going to say, what I thought was really sort of strange about it was, and it goes back to Full Dissidence in the book a little bit when I think about it, in that what happens when doing our basic jobs is considered remarkable or even noteworthy. All we're doing is reporting. That's it. I'm just doing the job that we've been doing for the past almost 30 years. But yet today, because we have such a gap in information, because we have so many places that don't talk, we have so few outlets that are actually trying to do the work that we talk about and that you and I talk about when we're DMing, it was sort of, it looks like it's something special, when really all it is I'm covering a story.
Now, you don't have to say a word as to what I'm going to say right now, but I really, really appreciate what happened on First Take with you and Stephen A. and Max and that whole conversation. I really, really appreciate the time that he devoted. And then, of course, we got Outside the Lines later with you and giving you that opportunity. But it speaks to what you just said. I shouldn't even have to have that thought process. That just should be automatic. Have things changed, or has it always kind of been that way, you think?
Well, a lot has changed. A lot has changed. There's no question about that. Oh, there I go again. A lot has changed in terms of how much devotion we give to actual journalism, as I say. And I'm not just talking about ESPN, I'm talking about our business. I'm talking about this business in terms of the contraction, the number of jobs, the number of opportunities. I've been saying for the last 10 or 15 years, as you've been looking at the contraction in the industry, there's always going to be places to write. There's always going to be places to say things because people deep down want information. The question is it going to be a career still? Are you going to be able to feed your family with it? Is it going to be something that allows you to go to the hospital if you get sick? Is it an actual career, or is it something that committed people do in their spare time in some sort of gig economy? So I was actually really thankful. I was happy that when I got home on Sunday and Monday, ESPN called and said that they wanted to devote some time to it. It was good to get back into it, to get back into talking about some issues, because as I've said quite often, there's a difference between storytelling and journalism. You can tell many, many, many stories that are very, very interesting, but are you actually looking at how power structures work and how these industries and the people within them are dealing with each other? At the end of the day, I always felt that the Kaepernick story wasn't just a story about justice and football and the rest of it, but also management and labor. And I think one of the reasons why this has been so overheated in so many ways is because whether you're Kaepernick pro or anti-cap or pro NFL or anti, so many of these issues are personal. People feel very, very strongly about this, and both the NFL and Kaepernick symbolize a lot of where people stand in this country.
Visiting with Howard Bryant, he is HBryant42 on Twitter, best-selling author, ESPN, NPR. Compare your perception of Colin Kaepernick before you went to Atlanta to now. Is it the same? Is it different? If different, how so?
Well, I think that as a person, it hasn't really changed. I think as a situation, I was hoping that there was going to be some change. And I think that when I got home and when I was doing all of my reporting and talking to people, and even just anecdotally talking to people who were fans and just paying attention to it, that they believed, oh, we're just back to the beginning. Nothing's changed. And I tended to disagree with that a bit, simply because we had a workout. There was actually some news. If we're going to talk about it, I could see if we all flew down there and nothing happened, but something did happen. There was some movement. There was negative movement in some ways as well. The interesting thing to me, when you asked me about my perception of it, was way more situational. When I got to Flowery Branch, the original site of the workout at the Falcons facility, there were essentially two or three, no more than three. There were two anti-cap protesters and one libertarian who said he wasn't quite a protester, but he wasn't quite a supporter either. He was there for the flag. So I don't know what category to put him in. And then there were 120 people out there, 115 somewhere in there supporting Kaepernick. And I think that what I took from that, when you're asking me about sort of my feeling about it, is it was a reminder of a couple of things. The first thing it reminded me of was the power of narrative and the power of whiteness in so many ways. Because if Kaepernick had gone to that workout and those people were anti-cap, if they were 120 strong, 125 strong with signs and really did not support him, if they were protesters, then that would have been the entire narrative of the weekend. It would have been, look at how many people came out against this man, and the NFL would have used that as a way to say, see, even with our best intentions, the fan base won't accept him, and this would have been the narrative. But because he had support, nobody talked about it. Nobody talked about the number of people who drove an hour away to come see him, or changed locations and drove an hour and 10 minutes back to the high school. And I kept asking myself, why isn't that allowed to be an asset? Why aren't we, whenever we talk about the distraction and this and the circus, so when it's negative, it's a distraction, and when it's positive, it's a circus. He never gets to use his support as an asset. And to answer your question, I just felt like the one perception that didn't change, it was maybe more reinforced, was simply a reminder of how many people actually do support him.
Visiting with Howard Bryant of ESPN, author of The Heritage, Sisters and Champions, and The Last Hero, has a book coming out, Full Dissident, Notes from an Uneven Playing Field, January 21st, 2020. I want to cut right to this because I think it's really important, and it's really weird that it's not brought up more often. Maybe it isn't weird, but in my view, Donald Trump is driving this entire story and has been from the outset. And an example of what I mean is Eric Reed, very outspoken, articulate, assertive on Twitter, not shy with the media, kneeling. We're not hearing Donald Trump talk about him, right? Colin Kaepernick doing the same thing, but he's talked in the past about Kaepernick, and now we have this situation that is ongoing, obviously. I mean, is Donald Trump driving the bus on this whole situation? Is Colin Kaepernick in a special category because of Donald Trump?
Well, it certainly doesn't. It doesn't help Colin Kaepernick when you have the president of the United States challenging you or criticizing you. And let's not forget the words that were said, calling him son of a bitch, saying that he didn't belong in the country. Maybe he shouldn't be allowed to be in the country. Those are some pretty powerful words from the most powerful person in the country. And so there's no question about that.
Is the fear that you're talking about, more specifically, to address what you just said in your previous answer, maybe not fear. This is me describing it as fear. I think that much of the media is afraid to characterize the difference between the light number of protesters against Colin Kaepernick and those four. I think that the media out there is afraid to cover it in that way because they're afraid of the blowback from Trump on a macro level, the people who are running these networks. And it comes down from on high. Is that legitimate?
Well, I disagree with it. I mean, I'm sure part of it's legitimate from an executive standpoint. I don't think that's a surprise at all because of the way power works. But I think that the reason you're not seeing it on the ground level is I think it depends on who's doing the writing. I think it depends on what's the perspective. You and I could go to an event, stand side by side with each other and write totally different things. That's the beauty of a free press. That's the beauty of journalism. That's why we love being on the ground. And I just think that when we look at these types of stories, especially this specific story, you have a perspective that is a mainstream perspective, and then you have a story that is not a mainstream perspective. For example, when you're talking about the controversy when Kaepernick was playing and he went down to Miami with the Malcolm X hat and the Castro shirt, that was written pretty much from one perspective. And that was the perspective of the mainstream, which was appropriate because we're talking about mass. That's why they call it mass media. But on the other hand, there is an entire history of African Americans and Cuba and all of that, and Cuban Americans and Pan-Africanism that nobody talks about. Why? Because we're the minority. So I think that one of the big reasons why you don't see the coverage in a more broad sense is because of who's doing the writing, who's got the pen, who's got the lens, who gets to tell the story, who's got the microphone.
As I know you've said before, a big factor in what happens in history is what people don't report. When we talk about the principle of politics and sticking to sports, it's just as important, and I've seen you mention this on Twitter, to note what people aren't doing as to what they are doing. So we're visiting with Howard Bryant, HBryant42, all one word on Twitter. What was the NFL's motivation behind the Colin Kaepernick workout?
Well, I think that it depends on what you believe. And I from the reporting that I've done so far, it really does feel like this was an opportunity for the commissioner, for Roger Goodell, to cut off a really thorny branch, to go out and to at least try. Do I believe his motivations were honorable at some level? I think that Colin Kaepernick's been a pain. I think this issue's been a pain. I think that his relationship with Jay-Z is based in some ways, not just financially, but do the right thing. And I think that the commissioner himself has boxed himself into a spot. If you're going to say, I don't believe that Colin Kaepernick is being blackballed by the 32 teams, this made sense. I think the problem, obviously, was that the execution of this left a lot to be desired. So why are they doing this? I think we have to do something that we don't do a very good job of very often, and that is, let's not speak in pronouns. Who are they? Because the 32 teams did not push this.
Exactly.
I think this came from the commissioner's office. I think this came from a power move, sort of strength of personality power move by Roger Goodell, that maybe what should have happened is you go to the 32 teams, you get buy-in from everybody, and we see if this is legitimate. And I don't think that really happened here.
Last thing for you. What are your thoughts on Myles Garrett, Mason Rudolph?
Well, I thought that it was a football fight. I thought that it was really sort of, I don't want to say insane, but I was surprised by the number of people who thought that Myles Garrett should be going up to Rikers. I thought that was something. I didn't think he
Surprised?
belonged. I was going to say, I didn't think that he needed to go to Leavenworth after this. I saw two football guys fighting. One guy tried to rip one guy's helmet off. The other guy crushed him in the face with the helmet. I mean, this is what they do sometimes when things go out of hand. And so I thought that the reaction, of course, was more interesting than the action, because I wasn't watching the game, actually. I was writing, and then I clicked on, I was getting some alerts about what was happening. And you would have thought from the alerts that were coming through that he hit him more than once in the head with the helmet. He took a swing at him and he clocked him. And I'm not minimizing that. I just think that it was a football fight. And I think that now the aftermath of who said what, I don't know Myles Garrett. There are a lot of people who swear by him, who say he's a really measured, good person. And so I just think that from an emotional standpoint, if someone had said something to me that had set me off on the hair trigger, I don't think I would have waited 4 days or 5 days to say something about it. But on the other hand, I'm not Myles Garrett, so I'm not calling him a liar. I'm just saying that I thought Mason Rudolph certainly did enough to get either suspended or reprimanded or something. If you watch that video, it wasn't a one-way thing. You watched the video, it made it sound, I mean, you heard about it, it made it sound like that Myles Garrett simply snapped for no reason and crushed the guy in the face with a helmet. Those two were fighting. That's how I saw it.
Can we expect something from you in terms of long form or whatnot reporting about the Kaepernick situation?
Yeah, as soon as I stop doing interviews, I'm writing on this now.
Keep doing them. Keep doing
them. I'm trying to get this thing done and to try to do a chronology of actually what went down, all of the things that we've been talking about, to do this sort of panorama that we try to execute, to get everybody's perspective and then let the reader decide. That's what we do best, right?
Thank you so much, Harry. Absolutely. I really appreciate it. And I'd love to have you on as we get closer to the book coming out.
Oh, yeah. Call anytime. It's great to finally see you face to face.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again. That's Howard Bryant. Howard Bryant, of course, of ESPN, NPR, best-selling author of the book, The Heritage, which is a must-read. Love it. I mean, I could go on and on about that. His book, his latest book that came out before this new one, it's called The Heritage. All I can tell you is go to Amazon and grab it. Get it on Kindle, whatever it is. Get the audiobook. Outstanding. It's going to, at the very least, I mean, the thing that's great about what Howard does is, and we didn't have a chance to talk to him about this, and I want to get into it a little bit more, maybe next time we have him on, talk about how his perspective, why it's so valuable, right? I mean, why are we having him on? Why is he on First Take, right? He's a guy that for me personally, knowing his background and his past and the nonfiction nature of what he does, not that fiction is a problem, but when he is talking to us about stuff, this is a guy who is as well versed on American history, not just civil rights or all that stuff. No, first of all, civil rights is American history, but everything he's telling us is grounded in a historical perspective. I'm not trying to fly over everybody here. I'm being serious. And that's what I try to bring to the table. When I'm giving you my thoughts and opinions, for instance, on the Garrett Rudolph thing, and I've had a chance to drill down, to the micro level on this story. And that's what we're going to bring you here in a moment on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. When I'm doing that, I'm kind of a poor man's version of Howard Bryant, very poor man's version. But when he's doing Kaepernick, this is a guy who wrote the definitive scholarly biography of Henry Aaron and the Williams sisters. This is a guy who is as knowledgeable about Jackie Robinson and works with the Jackie Robinson Foundation directly as anybody walking around on earth, and he's a great guy, good-natured guy. And the other thing I love about Howard particularly is when you follow him on Twitter, he's all about moderating the situation. He's not a hyperbolic person. He's not someone who just, Everything is authentic. And unfortunately, we live in a world where so much of what is in the context of sports discussion isn't. It's staged. It's staged. That's why it was such a stark thing to witness Howard Bryant and Stephen A. Smith on the same stage, on the same screen the other day on First Take. Because what Stephen A. is doing, who knows who's talking there? I don't know. When I'm watching Stephen A., I don't know who's talking. Is this really him? Or is this someone else that he talked to earlier in the day? Whoever it may be, but he's presenting it as his own opinion. I know not only is Howard talking to me when he was on the show, but I know that what he's bringing up and the perspective and insight that he provides, right, is based on something experiential in the past, historical. It's historically based. It's observing past events taking place over and over and over and over again, right? That's where he's coming from. I know that's where he's coming from because he's got so much knowledge about how things go, how they've been. So once you understand that, you really come to appreciate the transcendent nature of his analysis. It's 1000% he's done the work. He spent the time. And he's not a bomb thrower. He's not even close. Stephen A. is the bomb thrower. He just is. And the worst part of that is it's calculated. It's premeditated in what Stephen A. is doing. Very much so. Right? And he is accountable for it. He is responsible to it. So I'm looking forward to see what that book's all about. What a great title, though. Notes from an uneven playing field. But we're going to be shifting gears here in a second. We're going to talk some college football playoffs, rankings, analytics. We never talk college football analytics. Very rarely, because of the non-standardization of college football. And college football and college sports in general. But we're going to do that coming up with the college football professor, Adam McClintock of Matrix Analytics. That's coming up here in a few moments. And then later on in the show, we're going to go and do a deep dive on sports media gossip. Not so much gossip, but a guy who is breaking news, has the big scoops, and doesn't necessarily work for one of those brand name sports media outlets, newspapers, but is kicking everybody's butt in the field these days. Bobby Burak. And we'll chop it up with him because just so you know, if you're watching right now, you're going to want to stick around because I disagree almost with all of Bobby's opinions about things. I appreciate his reporting. I don't agree with him on his assessments of a lot of things. And I want to get into the NBA ratings discussion because he's all over the NBA like so many people are for the ratings declining. So we're gonna joust a little bit. I think he's a great guy though. Really enjoy having him on, friend of the show. And boy, what an unbelievable week of guests we've had already. And then we have Howard Bryant on today, which to me is, since we started doing this show, that's the biggest thrill for me so far. Having Howard Bryant on this show is pretty amazing. You may remember the Ken Burns baseball documentary, the 9-part series, right? That Ken Burns did back in 2000. That was kind of the breakout moment for Howard Bryant as a young writer. He was a featured person in that. If you remember, probably do. If you remember the baseball documentary that was done multi-part by Ken Burns, Howard Bryant was really the star. He was kind of the Shelby Foote, if you will. You think of the Civil War and Ken Burns, big splash in his career was the Civil War and Shelby Foote, and everybody remembers him. Well, Howard Bryant was kind of that guy for the baseball documentary at the time. And so He's a guy, though, and I was just thinking, if ever someone should have a podcast or be on a podcast, someone you could talk to for hours about things like Henry Aaron and our misperception of Hank Aaron, it's Henry. It's Howard Bryant. So what I want to do is I want to go back and I want to look at briefly before we get into the college football discussion going into the weekend, some big games coming up, Penn State, Ohio State. And I really want to drill down on the whole playoff rankings thing. I want to get back into the Myles Garrett, Mason Rudolph situation. And I want to look at some visuals, show you some things as it pertains to the situation. We've got some visuals for you that we set up specifically. And so what I'd like to do with our producer, Cam Smith, is I'd like to show you one of my tweets as it pertains to the situation in relation to a photograph of Rudolph and Garrett. So if you could put clip 1 up, Cam, that'd be great. So I can show people what we're talking about. Now, this is a tweet from earlier this morning on my Twitter feed that I put out. Mary Kay Cabot writes for Cleveland.com and the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And as part of her story, I quoted this out of one of her recent reports on the situation. Instead of sound, the NFL based its conclusion on the game officials' report and camera angles. Referee Cleet Blakeman was in close proximity to Garrett and Rudolph as they scuffled and did not hear a racial slur. Now you can see there's the photo of the incident. That's when, if ever there was going to be audio, number one, he's still got his helmet on, Mason Rudolph, right? And they're grappling on the ground. They're rolling around on the ground. And if you'll notice, the referee, the white hat, is nowhere to be seen. He's actually to the left of the photo at about the 2-yard line. He's about 8 yards away at that moment. And his ears are covered, right? So the basis of striking down out of hand, the appeal of Myles Garrett's suspension by Garrett himself, right, was based on the fact that Garrett asserted the N-word was used. The NFL based its decision to reject that appeal on what the NFL referee heard in that instance and camera angles. No audio, no recorded audio. But as you can see, the referee's not even in the frame. He's nearly a first down away, 10 yards away, right? And if you see photos of Cleet, I love that name, Cleet Blakeman. Cleet. Dude, it's 2019. There are cleats out there? That's an old school Southerner name, Cleet. I mean, you can't see him in the screen. There it is one more time. There's the image. This is right when, if something was going to be said, you've got the African-American offensive lineman, right, for the Steelers, teammates of Mason Rudolph, out of earshot. Also remember, you have crowd noise. And when those two guys went down, it was a thunderous reaction in Brown Stadium, obviously. Now, the game is about to end. The Browns are about to win, right? So people are sticking around. But there it is, crystal clear. And you can see my tweet. Instead of sound, the NFL rejects the appeal of Garrett based on what the ref heard. He's nowhere to be found. But the ref heard, and camera angles. As I said earlier, listen, come on. Audio is everywhere when it comes to the NFL. NFL film. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting audio from an offensive lineman or a quarterback, whatever it may be. You just can't. It's so absurd to think that there's no audio available of what happened here in some way, shape, or form. In fact, Pouncey, who's involved in the incident and who went on to kick Myles Garrett, was mic'd up for the game, but we didn't record it. That's the claim. Now, I want to move on to another visual. And again, right there, that doesn't pass the smell test. When the NFL says, we're going to reject Myles Garrett's claim of the N-bomb from Mason Rudolph because of what the ref heard and the camera angles. The ref's not even in the frame of the photograph of that confrontation when it would have happened. Right? And camera angle. What are you talking about? That's number one. Now, I want to bring up the other visual that we have. And this is really important. This is from my years of experience in the media, something that I'm going to point out that I guarantee you will never see anywhere else. Well, you might see it now, but somebody might do it. That's fine. They don't have to credit me either. But let's put up the other clip, Cam, of that situation, the other visual that I wanted to show you. And I believe it would be, number 4. Okay. So this is Mary Kay Cabot. This is from her article on the Cleveland.com website. And I screenshotted it, and I've got some arrows here. The top arrow, right, is the lead of her story. It's about the appeal of Myles Garrett's suspension by Garrett, in which he claims the N-word was used against him, and that's what prompted him to go nuts. And in the first paragraph, we get the lead. The NFL had no recorded sound from the field in determining that there was no evidence that Steelers quarterback Mason Rudolph hurled a racial slur at Myles Garrett. A league source told Cleveland.com. 2 graphs later, quote, "We looked into it and found no such evidence," unquote. NFL spokesman Brian McCarthy told Cleveland.com. Right? What are the odds that the league, remember, league, not a team, league source is Brian McCarthy? What are the odds? They're not just good. This is my opinion. And by the way, Mary Kay Cabot is out front on this story. She's doing the definitive reporting on it that I've seen, documenting it. But the odds that the league source is Brian McCarthy, it's 100%. That's him. That's how it works. And I've been in the sports journalism business for a long time. So that's my opinion. All right. And that's not to denigrate Mary Kay Cabot. What's happening there is Brian McCarthy, in my opinion, is saying, don't quote me on the part that we have no recorded sound. But you can quote me saying, we looked into it and found no such evidence. So a general rejection of the appeal of Myles Garrett based on the N-word. We looked into it. Found no such. Well, we know what they looked into. What did the ref hear? Who was it? Cleve Blakeman, who wasn't even in the frame of the photo for the confrontation when something would have been said. The perfectly timed photograph. He was nowhere. He was 8 yards away and had earmuffs on. Okay. And the linemen are standing far enough away, the Steelers linemen, the black linemen, that they wouldn't have heard anything. And you have this crescendo of sound coming down at the end of a victory of the Browns over their number 1 rival. Okay. We looked into it and found no. So, well, they also looked into it with camera angles. Great. So here's the big question. Here's the most important question. Why will Brian McCarthy or whomever that may be, the league source, not put their name on that? That the NFL definitively has no recorded sound from the field, determining that there was no evidence that Mason Rudolph hurled a racial slur at Myles Garrett. Why won't they go on the record and attach their name to it? As long as they don't, that leaves the question open. And you can't help but wonder if they do have audio. Now, when you look at this situation, if you're 20 years old, you're going to look at it, and I don't want to pontificate or condescend, but I'm going to, because when you know history, when you've studied, and this kind of plays into the additional, the value add that a Howard Bryant represents when he's giving you an opinion. The value add. It's not an agenda. He's a nonfiction history guy. He's a scholar. And I've spent a lot of time studying a lot of things myself. I'm not a scholar per se. Don't write books. But I spent a lot of time on history, a lot more than any other sports talk show host you've ever watched or listened to. And I'm very, very confident in that statement. And so when I see that right there, when I see that photo, when I see the analysis and the basis of the NFL's rejection, out of hand, open and shut, of Myles Garrett's appeal, right? That not only doesn't look right, it isn't right. There's something there, right? There's something wrong. And that doesn't even account for, well, I accounted for it earlier when I told you that nobody records intimate moments during games more than the NFL. That is as important to the marketing of the league and has been since NFL Films began and pioneered the practice, that was subsequently picked up by all sports and used to market the sport. The NFL is a pioneer in miking players. Do you understand that? That's really important. So when you have that, you have the photo and the disconnect in the justification for the rejection of the appeal and the N-word. And then you have nobody at the NFL who wants to own up to the fact that there was absolutely no recorded audio of the incident. They don't want to put their name on that. All right. And you know history, and you understand that your perception of significant events over the years, more often than not, is probably off. Once you learn the inanimate documented facts of significant events in history, you go back and do a deep dive. You don't Google it and look at the first page of results. You learn, for instance, that Jackie Robinson didn't play baseball until he was 25. He was a football player. And he would never have played baseball for the Dodgers had he not been a football star. You learn that. And then you find all the footage of him playing football, and it's unbelievable. Right. Nobody knows about that. They should. It's very important. And that Jackie Robinson was benched by the United States Army in a football game against the University of Missouri by our own military during World War II. Jackie Robinson in a football game. That sort of revelatory stuff where you've got a guy who's the George Washington of sports in the United States, and you had no idea he even played football, and that's our national pastime today? Really? That's one tiny example that I'm throwing at you when it comes to the veracity of what I'm saying, which goes, light years beyond what other hosts are going to bring to the table. All right. You heard Howard refer to this, Howard Bryant, who just joined us from ESPN, NPR, celebrated best-selling author, talking about how I thought, one of the more interesting things that he brought up and that he focused on was the discrepancy in protesters, where you had, 2.5 protesters, I think it was, against Colin Kaepernick at the original location of the workout, Flowery Branch, where the Falcons train, their facility. You had 2 protesters who were against Kaepernick, and then you had hundreds in support of him, right? Pointing that out, and also pointing out the fact that nobody mentioned that. It was mentioned a little bit on Twitter. It was documented on Twitter. But his point was, had it been the other way around, you can guarantee that everybody on FS1, everybody on Fox Sports Radio, everybody at ESPN would be focusing on the fact that you had all of these people out there outraged at Colin Kaepernick, and they would be using that, the media, the talk shows, would be using that as a weapon to marginalize Kaepernick further, right? He's exactly right. He's exactly right. It's astonishing to me, by the way, as an aside, there were so few protesters against Kaepernick. When you think about, and it just goes to show you how the story is somewhat misrepresented, I think, publicly. What a surprise. When it comes to, the South, it's amazing. I remember, and I know we played this. I think we did, at least, when Trump went to the Alabama LSU game. We played you. I'm not a Trump guy, but we played you and showed you. Here's the response of 100,000 people at the Alabama football game. That's in the South. Atlanta's in the South. I know Atlanta's a little different than Tuscaloosa, Alabama, but not that different. And I lived in the South, worked in the South, worked in both states, went to school in Georgia, right? I've got that perspective. And the fact that 100,000 people stood up and cheered Donald Trump, and they did, at the Alabama LSU game. And then you look at the Kaepernick situation just a couple of 100 miles away in Atlanta. Not in an urban area. Flowery Branch is about 50 miles outside of Atlanta. It's a long way. It's out in the burbs. The fact that there was really nobody there who was pissed at Kaepernick, what's that tell you? What's that tell you? That the story is the polarization that he represents is misrepresented. At least the extent of it. So that's just one more reason why when you, and that's something that the whole reason I'm bringing that up is Howard Bryant. He was quick. That was one of the first things that he pointed out. And the whole point of me bringing it up here is, bringing in that Kaepernick protester, principle, connecting it to Garrett and Rudolph, right? So when we've got the N-word being thrown around, leaked to Adam Schefter, he reports it. Myles Garrett made this accusation, right? It was supposed to be this private thing. It's not private. What a surprise. But then you have guys like, for instance, Doug Gottlieb on Fox Sports Radio, you probably heard of, and Doug's a nice guy, does college basketball for Fox Sports, been around a long time, former basketball player, college hoops player, ESPN guy, but he's going berserk on his radio show yesterday, calling for additional games being tacked on to the suspension, whatever those games are. And I laid out to you what I thought Garrett should get, 10 games, 6 the rest of this season, 4 next. I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying that Myles Garrett should necessarily have his suspension reduced. That's not what I'm saying at all. In fact, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is if we have audio of that slur, if it exists, if Rudolph actually did do that, he should be suspended. He should be punished. And he's got nothing. And we mentioned it yesterday, and we mentioned it to Michelle Tafoya, who was with us from Sunday Night Football, of course. Michelle Tafoya, the great sideline reporter. And I said to her yesterday in the context of the Garrett Rudolph situation, isn't it interesting that, not knowing, by the way, this is before the N-word thing came out, not knowing that we were about to find out 15 minutes later that Garrett was making this accusation about the N-word. But I said, isn't it fascinating that 2 days ago, out of nowhere, suddenly we get this statement, which preceded just by a day Garrett's accusation of the N-word. Mason Rudolph calling an impromptu press conference to further apologize for his role in the situation. Fascinating. That quinky dink, right? So what's happening? The fact that we don't have audio, the NFL claims that we don't have audio, even though no one will attach their name to it. That's being used as a weapon against Garrett and to obfuscate the facts of the story. What we're doing is avoiding that train wreck, that car crash. It's like if you're with us Sports by Brooks on Fancred is like a really good Uber driver. We are going to take you around all of the car crashes where you sit in traffic. Oh, geez, I got to listen to this again. Screaming and yelling about the same stuff. Everybody's saying the same thing. Not only do we not say the same thing, but we give you reasons why we're not. And, oh, it actually makes sense. Oh, it's actually the truth. It's facts. Wow. We just showed them to you. Inanimate documented facts. So Adam McClintock is now with us. And it's an honor and a pleasure to have a guy, for once, the college football professor on Twitter, who will talk analytics with us as it pertains to college football. You don't get that very often, and he's in a festive mood. I love that background, man. Way to go. That's
thanks, man. It's all due to my wife. She's already in a festive mood. As soon as they start putting Christmas stuff out and in stores, she's all about it. So
what is the map behind you? Is that the whole world there that we've got? This
is actually my wife's office, and she does some online teaching to kids over in Asia and that region. So yeah.
That's freaking awesome. That is so cool.
She's quite the lady.
Well, congratulate her for me. That's phenomenal.
All right.
Yeah. You don't really talk analytics all that much when you talk about college football, and that's why I really wanted to get a chance to talk to you, and in the context of the college football playoff rankings. But can you give us a little background on what it is you do in relation to college football?
Yeah, what I do is we project game spreads throughout the year. We also do coach efficiency ratings, which is something we do per play. We break it down to the very basic building block of a football game, which is a play, and we grade coaches through their efficiency in relation to their talent that they have on their roster and the talent that they're facing. So that's one of the things we do. As this pertains to the college football playoff, we've actually went through and 5 years ago, when the whole process started, we looked at it from a human element, and we said, okay, these 13 people are going to come together in this room, and in a matter of 48 hours, they're going to be able to A, watch enough game film, B, and come to a consensus to give us the top 25 teams every week. And we kind of that just doesn't, if you do the math on that, that's just mind blowing, because you have these 13 guys, they're busy guys,
They're very didiligent, hardworking guys. They don't get a lot of sleep. Gene Smith doesn't get a lot of sleep. You should know that. Very hardworking.
I guess so. I mean, they're harder working than I am if they're watching 30 hours of game film and the 48 they had to make the decisions. I mean, it's because that's what it comes down to. If they're making a top 25 off of what they've said, like they claim to have all these tablets full of these games and everything. If they watch 1 hour of game film, for let's say 30 teams to make this top 25, that's 30 hours of game film, which one isn't probably humanly possible, and two, if it is, how many of these guys on there actually know what they're looking at in this game film? So me and my buddy Dave Bartu, who runs College Football Matrix, we sat down and we tried to decipher what kind of process they're actually doing. And just by listening to some of the reports and some of the things that the breadcrumbs they've laid out there for us, we've been able to kind of pinpoint how they, make their resumes. And then from that, it's pretty easy to project their rankings every week.
Now, go ahead. So since 2000, it's you. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
You're right, bud. Since 2014, we've been able to project our rankings within less than one spot per team accuracy for the top 25 on average. So it's very predictable. I always love seeing everybody's tweets and everybody's outrage. Oh, it's not predictable. It's just a dart throw. No, it's not. It's extremely predictable, actually. So,
wow, you answered my question. You answered my question, because my question was going to be, how has it changed based on the makeup of the committee over the years? Has it changed? Has it been a move? And you just answered it. And so now, of course, the next question is, we're visiting with Adam McClintock, the college football professor on Twitter, CFB_professor of Matrix Analytics. And also you can find him at ATHDEPT Edges, Athletic Department Edges. That's abbreviated ATHDEPT Edges on Twitter, co-founder there. So now, of course, the question is, and is this a proprietary thing, algorithmic thing, or how do you guys know that? How did you figure this out? What do you see?
Everything out there is public knowledge. The formula that they use for strength of schedule was something that one of the big networks reported on a few years ago. It's a very simple model, and it actually favors the SEC and some of the scheduling practices of some conferences over the others. It includes win percentage of your opponents' win percentage, and then for FCS opponents, it includes the losses of those records, but not their wins. So, let's say, for example, the Big 12 and the Big 10 and the Pac-12, who each played 9 conference games, compared to the ACC and the SEC, they're at a disadvantage in that formula because half the conference takes an extra loss when that could be an out-of-conference game and get counted as a win, raising everybody's strength of schedule collectively in the entire conference. So, yeah, that's kind of the essence of their strength of schedule formula. Quality wins and top 25 quality wins are just kind of their definition of a quality win is any team that you've beaten who has a 500 record and is considered an FBS team. That's a quality win in their book, which that kind of blows a lot of people's minds. But that's
low bar.
It is a very low bar. I mean, FAU is a quality win for Ohio State. I mean,
right. So are you saying to me right now that you can predict? You really know, you have a feel at this moment what's going to play out and what's going to set up the 4 teams as we go forward, that it's very, very predictable, and that if we follow you, you're going to be able to tell us
absolutely
what no one else is telling us. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, we've been off by less than 1 spot, an average of 1 spot per team for the entire top 25 since 2014.
That's amazing. So let me just throw one thing out, or, as we go along, just throw some things out. And we're visiting with Adam McClintock, the college football professor. I'm calling you that. I love that nickname. That's just great. We're gonna go with that, Adam. A CFP underscore professor joining us. So why is Oregon where Oregon is? Why is it atop this heap of teams that seemingly are ranked at random somewhat in the college football rankings?
Well, right now, if you look at Oregon's resume, their strength of schedule, according to what the committee uses, is 39th. That'd shock a lot of people, actually. They're 39th ranked strength of schedule in the country. They currently have 3 quality wins that the committee considers quality wins. And when you compare that to some of the teams behind them, like Alabama and Utah and Oklahoma, whose strength of schedules are in the hundreds and the 80s, respectively. That's why Oregon is where they are right now. They also have something that they, they've actually recently come out and said they don't use, but we have multiple articles where they've actually quoted it: game control. They use game control. It's something that think of it as per minute of gameplay. What is the roadmap for how you got to that final score? Okay. They use this. For example, Oklahoma, they did beat Baylor last weekend, but it was only by 3 points. They had to come back down by 25 to do it. That really hurt their game control stat in that category. So Oregon, knowing that Oregon has better game control than Oklahoma or Utah or Penn State right now. So
is that just margin of victory, or how the game played out? I mean,
basically it's margin of victory at its very, you boil it down to its very essence. It's margin of victory, and they can't really come out and say that, because then when Clemson goes out and beats poor NC State 65-0, and then they don't have blood on their hands. But it's essentially margin of victory.
Let me ask you a question then, and this is obviously, it's a completely subjective, abstract, crazy thing that no one would ever know necessarily, but based on what you're telling me, first of all, I wouldn't be surprised at all. In fact, I would assume that most of the schools out there follow you and Dave, and have picked up on what you're doing, or maybe that they're independently analyzing it in the way that you guys are, and the accuracy is uncanny. So with that in mind, and what you just described, how this thing plays out, do you think that the reason that Tua played for Alabama against Mississippi State, which for me was a joke, he shouldn't have been anywhere near the field, was specifically because of game control?
Hey, you could make that argument. You could make that argument. If Alabama knows that, hey, we've got a weak schedule, our schedule's ranked in the hundreds right now, we have to make up for that and show that we're controlling this weak schedule handily. If that's what they were, I mean, for the kids' sake, I hope that's not what went into that. That's what
it is. I'm serious. Yeah. I mean, it and isn't it amazing to me that this is the problem with college football, that we're not having the conversation we're having right now. That's why we're having you on. No one's having this conversation. It doesn't exist out there in sports talk land. We have all of these hours filling time up, and nobody's talking about this specifically. And there's a lot of different reasons philosophically, I think, for that, because we all seed the coaches in college sports, not so much in pro sports, but because they're the constant year after year. And so we tend to give them a pass. And so the narrative around Saban is, it literally is, Adam, and I've heard sports talk show hosts bring this up in the last week. We had Tim Brando on. We talked about this as well. The narrative is, do we have the right to criticize him? That's what people are saying on Mike Greenberg saying on Get Up. Do we have the right to criticize Nick Saban? What do you mean, do we have the right? What's your job? That's what you do.
Yeah.
You know? And that's why I think what you're doing is so revelatory. So is there an algorithm here? Is there a mathematical formula? Is there something you guys are locking in mathematically that allows you to do these predictions?
Not necessarily. It's and that's a thing that really blows people's minds. Is there's no algorithm. Basically, the way that we picture what happens, okay, is the committee members, they all meet on Monday, okay. They all are presented with these resumes, these very simple resumes that include strength of schedule, quality wins, top 25 wins, and game control. And they say, okay, here's where these teams should be according to those and to those metrics. Now, you guys, do we have any arguments on top four? And if no, we're going. And they go through a process like this, and that's how that top 25 is made in such a short period of time. If you've ever been on a committee, you know how hard it is to get a consensus about anything. So a committee of 13 people with different backgrounds, imagine that coming together every week with something as politically divisive as college football is at times. And it's a big money thing. So they have to have a very simplified process to really cut this down and get it done. And I think some of the reason people don't want to believe it is they like the suspense created on those Tuesday night selection shows. They don't want to know how the sausage is made in that sense, you know,
or how simple it is.
How simple it is. Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, you guys obviously you study the media in an analytics sense more so than probably anybody out there. So, what are currently the hidden agendas as you see them, if there are, amongst the committee members? What are the things that you guys know that really nobody else knows because you study it so closely with these individual committee members?
That they really don't watch any game tape. They really don't watch any game tape. It's very simple. It's these four categories, and that's the only numbers they look at.
But do you see? Well, I didn't ask the question as well as I should have. Bias. What sort of conference bias? Do you think that there's underlying things involving the rankings that you see that are out of kilter from what is predictive and that may be instructive when it comes to analyzing what potential bias is embedded into the committee right now? Because, of course, that is going to change, I think, over time. It might. I'm asking you. You're the expert on it.
Well, just looking at face value, it definitely favors the way they have it set up right now. It definitely favors the SEC and the ACC. The way the strength of, as well, because of how the ACC is tremendously weak this year, so they're not doing themselves any favors. But let's take the SEC. They take that argument. The way they schedule, it's they have 14 teams in these conferences, right? In this conference, they schedule 8 conference games per year. That's ideal for this strength of schedule formula that they have. They schedule FCS opponents, which if they schedule the right FCS opponents and it's a good opponent that only has 2 losses, they're penalized virtually nothing.
Really?
In the schedule.
Really?
Nothing.
Huh.
There's no penalty. So that's why they do it. That's why the SEC continues to do this unapologetically. I think this is the FCS cupcake weekend for the SEC. They're not going to get penalized for that in a lot of cases, because if they're playing, for example, Western Carolina this week is who Alabama plays. Right. I don't know Western Carolina's record off the top of my head, but let's just say they have 2 losses. Okay.
Right.
That 2 losses is like going to move their strength of schedule index number like 0.00001. It's really? Not gonna it's not gonna make it that big of a difference for them to take that FCS opponent. So that's why the drive from the Big Ten and the Pac-12 to say, well, we're not going to schedule any FCS opponents, or we're gonna play 10 Power 5 teams a year. That's actually not favoring them with the current strength of schedule formula. So
in the final analysis, who do you think, I mean, obviously we got to project and see games play out, but who do you think are the best 4 teams in your opinion?
Who's the committee going to select?
Let's put it this way. If we did the college football playoff today, who would those 4 teams be? And who are the teams, maybe 1 or 2 teams you think that are, and of the teams that aren't in that 4, what are the strongest 2 teams outside of that?
Well, right now, if the playoffs were tomorrow and the teams didn't play any more games from here on out, it'd be LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia. That's who the committee has pegged right now. Now, obviously, some of those teams are going to go through championship games. Oregon is a team that really has an excellent shot. If they win out, they're probably going to be the number 4 seed if LSU continues to win and beats Georgia. The SEC
over Alabama.
Over Alabama. Yeah, Alabama, they're in trouble. They're on life support as far as the playoff. If they continue to use the same process. Now, this is going to be interesting this season. This is going to put the whole theory of them not looking at helmet logos to test here. Because if Alabama does get in with their resume over an Oregon or over a Utah, or say Utah would win the Pac-12, or even an Oklahoma at this point, it doesn't match. Something's fishy there, because it would be an outlier for the last 5 years.
Because of game control or strength of schedule?
Because of their strength of schedule. Alabama's strength of schedule, I've got it projected out towards the end of the year, is going to be around 85th.
And Auburn's not doing them any favors.
No, not at all. Nope.
Boy, well, I want to bring you back maybe towards the end of the year as we really get close to the definitive to just lock this down, so we can just lock it in with you, because that's what you guys are doing.
That'd be excellent. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
I can't thank you enough, man. Thank you for taking the time, Adam.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
That's Adam McClintock, college football professor, as we now refer to him on this show, Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And we're going to be visiting here shortly with Bobby Burak as we wrap things up for this week. Do it every weekday, Monday through Friday, beginning at noon Eastern, 9 here on the Pacific Coast. I am in Los Angeles today. And just in the last 2 days, we have turned the heat on. And I've got an undershirt on under my uniform that I wear every day. You're on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And so far, we've had Howard Bryant on today. Michelle Tafoya was with us yesterday. Andrew Siciliano has been on with us this week. Had the voice of the Patriots, Bob Sochi, on. We had Tom Curran, our old friend, and Bo Curran on from NBC Sports Boston. On and on and on we go. Amazing guests. You never know who's going to pop up. Kirk Herbstreit sometimes. And just moments ago, I feel like now, after talking to Adam, he makes me confident about how to look at college football and the rankings. Before, it was just pin the tail on the donkey. Who knows? After the first 3 teams, really, right now. And why do I say that? I say that because of what he just said about Alabama. he studied it for 5 years from an analytics perspective, and he is predicting it. And he's very close in their success over a long period of time. This is not a handicapper, somebody who is selling you picks and making up their record. He's not doing that. So now that we've talked to him and he said what he said about Alabama, that has completely changed my perspective. And it's ridiculous. A longtime college football fan like myself, or like you, to listen to that and then all of a sudden, wait a minute, the light bulb goes on. They're not going to make it this year. That's the problem with college football. We should already know that. He should be on ESPN right now telling us that. Speaking of ESPN, somebody who knows more about what's going on behind the scenes at ESPN, Jesus, than anybody out there, at least people that are out there reporting. Bobby Burak of the Big Lead is with us again. We can't get this guy off the show because every time I look up, he's breaking a story. And not just breaking a story, he's got some unbelievable sources and details and legitimate stuff. Hey, Bobby, what's going on, man?
Brooks, happy to be back on. Still no Twitter update, but I'm here still at Burak Bobby _ and at least for this month, I guess we'll stick with that. Maybe the new year will bring me some luck in that direction.
Now, you just can't, Bobby, you're referring to your Twitter handle. You just can't seem to let that go. You're carrying that around. That's a burden you're carrying around, right?
Well, it's not only that, it's the fact that Twitter's telling me if I change it, I'm going to lose my verification. So it's one thing for them to not let me do it, then to eventually let me do it, then to say, oh, if you do it, you're going to lose your verification. Now,
and the problem is it's Burak Bobby, one word, and then this _ Now, were you drinking when you did that handle? What happened?
Brooks, I actually had a worse one than that before. I think there was like 2 dashes in it. So I tried upgrading, and that was the best available. Peter Burns, you've had Peter Burns on your show. He really gets on me for that.
So wait a minute. There's another did you do the _ because there are other Bobby Buraks out there?
So Twitter says, but if you do a search, I'm the only one. There's one burner account that I might have made when I was like 13 to try to troll somebody, but that one's taken too, and I don't know how to get back on that one.
Oh man, that's amazing. Bobby Burak from the Big Lead is with us. Hey, so what's going on with this Feinbaum stuff? That's an unbelievable scoop. Tell us about that story that you've done on Paul Feinbaum.
Yeah, so early last month, Feinbaum met up with John Skipper at a restaurant in New York City. Obviously John Skipper is executive chairman of DAZN, former ESPN president, Paul's former boss. Now, people can make a lot out of nothing, and this is not just former employee, boss getting together, having a beer, having dinner. Feinbaum and Skipper have a long relationship. Before Skipper left abruptly at ESPN, he was in a contract negotiation with Paul and his team for a contract that would have put Paul well north of $3 million per year and up to $4 million, I'm told to my sources. So it could have reached up to $4 million per year. Obviously, we know Skipper no longer there. Jimmy Pitaro inserted as president. Paul's salary now is around $2 million. So, Brooks, you might say, well, $2 million, that's satisfying the most. But when you're in the negotiations for $4 million a year and you go all the way down to $2 million, that's not making anybody happy. And not only that, listen, we can dispute, we talked about last time, Paul's value. I think he's one of ESPN's more valuable talents. But look what this guy does. He's on the road 5 nights a week. He goes from Bristol on Sundays back home to Charlotte for one night, then after his show on Mondays, flies to New York until Thursday morning. He's home Thursdays, flies to SEC Nation Friday morning, and then back to Bristol.
Now, wait a minute. Have they always done that with him? Have they always?
No. This is something new. I mean, he was doing some traveling, but with the new, now he's in New York 2 nights a week. Now he's in Bristol on Sundays. And he's doing a 4-hour radio show by himself. He's doing First Take, Get Up, Sports Center. I mean, this guy is working as much as anybody at ESPN. That salary, if you look at what others are making, Katie Nolan, Bomani Jones, people that I'm not super high on, they're making that, if not more, doing much less and with much less value. So Feinbaum has a reason to want more from ESPN. If you look at what DAZN would give him, I'm told a higher salary and his choice where he can live. He can live wherever he wants with DAZN, New York, Los Angeles. Doesn't have to be in Charlotte. He'd work significantly less, and they'd give him much more freedom on that platform. And he'd have Westwood One's affiliates, which are very strong now with Pat McAfee. To me, it's a no-brainer for both sides. If I had to make a prediction right now, once Paul Feinbaum's out of his ESPN contract, he will be a DAZN talent.
How long is the contract?
His current contract runs until spring 2021, but I'm told that there's a strong belief that they can get him out sooner. He has the best agent in the entire business, Nick Khan of CAA, and they think that they can get him out sooner.
Interesting. Visiting with Bobby Burak of the Big Lead. So, but hold everything. Yeah. What the hell does DAZN have to do with college football and Paul Feinbaum? I mean, what's the connection there? There's a DAZN, of course, it's boxing. And it's the baseball highlight show, and now it's Pat McAfee. But, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, would this just be a one-off with Feinbaum where you're going to do an isolated thing with college football? But give us a little background on DAZN and how this would fit. What's the logic behind it?
Well, there's three reasons why this makes sense. One is they gave Pat McAfee a show, which is simulcast on DAZN and Westwood One. And they want to build out a rotation, and they're looking for radio shows with dedicated audiences. And Paul has that. They're going to look beyond
subscriptions.
That. Subscriptions, because in order to move subscriptions, you can't just put anybody on. You have to have people that have audiences that are willing to pay, such as the belief is Feinbaum has that. Dan Lepetard surely has that. Barstool has it. Not that I think Barstool is going to ever team up with DAZN, but they're also a group that has that. I think Clay Travis has that as well, that dedicated follow-up. And number two, a report just came out yesterday morning before mine by AL.com that they can see DAZN bidding for some SEC games. Now, it could just be a standalone, maybe an SEC championship game on pay-per-view. Remember, the SEC rights are sold by Feinbaum's agent, who also sold the Tiger Woods Phil Mickelson event last year to Bleacher Report Live. So, wow. And there's no better way to get in a relationship with the SEC than have Feinbaum, which is what Skipper told him before he left ESPN. He said, Paul, your value is beyond what you bring on air because of what you do for our relationship with the SEC.
Well, I think that's the question. Does Greg Sankey and the people running the SEC, the presidents of the school, the conference commissioner of the SEC, if they say, well, you got Feinbaum there, we're more likely to give you at least some consideration. You're saying that that's the case?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, I think number one is about building that relation or that batting order around Pat McAfee with the Westwood One. So I think that's what number one. I think number two, what it would do for their just ability to bid for the SEC. I wrote yesterday, if all the digital streaming services bid on it right now, DAZN has no upper hand. ESPN has ESPN Plus, Amazon has more money, but if they have Feinbaum, all of a sudden they have something that ESPN would no longer have, something Amazon wouldn't have, and something Bleacher Report Live surely wouldn't have. And then you go back to relationships, Feinbaum and Skipper, and Feinbaum's agent. He's done deals with Skipper and several with Jamie Horwitz, including 2 with Skip Bayless and Colin Cowherd at FS1 that were excess of $6 million per year. And another executive at DAZN is Josh Santry, former CAA agent who worked under Nick Khan. If you connect these dots, I mean, it makes a lot more sense than it does in Brooks.
It does. I mean, it now the whole context of it is starting to make sense. The stratagem that's involved in what DAZN, specifically what DAZN is doing with their talent lineup. Visiting with Bobby Burak at the Big Lead and talking about DAZN, DAZN. There's probably people out there who have no idea what we're talking about, but DAZN is this subscription. It's the Netflix of sports. That's what they describe themselves as. It's a streaming app essentially, but now what, they're on some cable systems, or they're looking to do that, distribute it?
I don't know about that. I haven't heard that. I know they had the deal with Westwood One. They also have a deal with SiriusXM, which I reported a couple weeks ago. They're putting their boxing show on SiriusXM. I think that's another thing to watch if DAZN can team up with SiriusXM in Westwood One, and air radio shows. That's appealing to a lot of people. And we know that Horwitz and Skipper have never been shy of paying people probably more than what the market demands. So I think all of a sudden this could be a very appealing destination for not just Paul Feinbaum, people with contracts coming up in the next few years.
People who watch this show regularly will know what I'm about to say now that you mentioned that about Skipper and money. But John Skipper has made more money for more people in the history of sports media than any other single person. When you look at the NBA, you look at all across the board as far as broadcast rights agreements and salaries go. And of course, a lot of that has involved CAA. A lot of that involves the individuals that you cite, the agents at CAA. So, So it sounds like that this is the strategy where you're going to bring in somebody like a Feinbaum or a McAfee, or you mentioned other names. And so the prerequisite for that is they have to have an existing audience that's going to come in, that's avid, that's going to subscribe, right? And then they also have to dovetail into the strategy for broadcast rights agreements. That sounds a lot like Clay Travis is going to be on DAZN before too long, right? Sounds like it to me. I mean, he's got the relationship with Greg Sankey. I mean, you threw his name out. It wasn't me. It was all you.
So Clay Travis would be a great addition to DAZN for all those reasons. But here's the issue. Who's his arch nemesis? John Skipper.
Oh, he is.
He battled Skipper. I mean, like, over a one-way battle, but nobody was harsher on Skipper 2 years ago than Clay Travis.
But wait a minute. Well, that's true. But he is he not represented by CAA too? Clay Travis, if I'm not mistaken. I think
so. His former agent is an executive at DAZN. I mean, I think it makes sense. Let's skip a lot, but will Skipper accept that? I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah. Now everything about DAZN is starting to come much clearer thanks to you, Bobby. So I want to ask you additionally about a story you did on the NBA ratings, and that seems to be a topic du jour for sports business reporters, sports media people, some talk show hosts out there. So what's going on with the ratings in the NBA?
Stop you there. I don't think topic for any talk show host, any sports media writer outside of me. I mean, everybody's ignoring
Clay Travis.
I mean,
Clay Travis is all over it.
Yeah. Outside of Clay and myself, no one else is covering. I mean, the NFL ratings were down. ESPN was leading shows with it. People thought, you had people like Bomani Jones thinking the NFL was done. The Around the Horn people, they couldn't believe it. They thought nobody was watching the NFL. Nobody's mentioning the NBA ratings were down. They're down 27% from 2 years ago. 27%. That's not a typo. 27%. I mean, that's a disaster for the NBA. LeBron James moved out west. They tried tweaking that in the game. This not help. It's made things worse. There's nobody that people care about. Clippers are probably the second biggest draw right now. He's watching half the games. He's even going to show up. They have a game on ESPN tonight against Brooks. I mean, I don't know. I'd say maybe 50.
Let's we're
yeah. I mean, the NBA is in a position right now.
Yeah, it is. The NBA right now, I think, has some issues. And when you look at, I just all the empty seats. I'm watching these games. I'm watching these highlights. Yeah. You've got a cluster of superstars on a small number of teams. And although there's a lot of overall interest, I think, that's being pumped up by what's happening in Los Angeles to a certain extent. But when you do this story on NBA ratings, are you thinking to yourself that you're doing this story in part because no one else is talking about it? Is that part of your thought process?
Yes, to point out the hypocrisy in the way sports are covered and how it's just such an ignored topic. That's certainly part of it. I'd say that might even be part A, is that nobody else is covering this, and there's an interest in this. I've written about the NBA ratings probably 4 times since last year. They've all done well. People have all reached out. People have all been mad at me. I mean, it's created buzz. There's an interest in this, but the audience doesn't know because people are ignoring it. I would ask, Where's FS1? Where's ESPN on these topics? Where's the Washington Post? Where's the
Why
New
aren't they
York
hiring
Times?
you?
Where
We
are
need to
these
get
people?
you on FS1 or
I
ESPN.
don't know. There's two people in the whole business.
Welcome to my world, by the way.
I guess
by the way,
Jason
welcome
Whitlock.
to my world, my friend.
I guess Whitlock, I'll say three. Clay, myself, and Whitlock. So three of us are on an island here. Everybody else
last
is running
thing,
from it,
this is my prediction. Stephen A. Smith is going to have his own show before too long. What do you think of that? His own talk show. He's checked out of that show, from what I see. But give me your informed opinion. What do you think is going to happen with him?
Oh, I heard he wants to be in Los Angeles, actually.
Right.
He's based in New York right now. I heard that his first choice would be in LA. It really goes back to how they maneuver this thing with Max Kellerman. I don't think it's easy just to pull Kellerman off first take. You start thinking, could the best way for Stephen A. to not work with Kellerman is just leave first take and do his own show? He told a website, I think it was Uprocks, a year ago, that one thing he still wants to do before he retires is host a late night show.
Late night.
That's something that he thinks he could do. He did, quite frankly, it didn't work out. But Stephen A. wasn't really Stephen A. back then. He's grown exponentially since then. I think it'll work now. Now, they have a late night show with SVP. I don't see them moving that anytime soon. But, that show Stephen A. is doing at 7 o'clock on Wednesdays, or that's a tease of things to come. I'm with you. I think before his contract is up, which is now 5 years from now, I think you'll see him hosting a solo show, whether that's with or without.
Great job, man. Unbelievable scoops. Following you every day at the Big Lead. And Bobby, or it's Burak Bobby _ Thank you, man. Take care of yourself. We'll talk to you soon. That's Bobby Burak of the Big Lead joining us. And I really like talking to him. And he's kind of given me an overall perspective now, or at least a better fundamental understanding of what's going on at DAZN. So speaking of the NBA, we had a couple of things I wanted to show you, or at least one thing from the NBA I wanted to show you, some clips, some video just for fun, because we've gotten awful serious today. And not all the time, but. So I wanted to show you a really cool video compilation, very, very short, of Luka Doncic of Dallas that I spotted on Twitter. If you have, I got a couple of clips. I want to do one from the NBA as we shove off at the end of the week. And then I'd like to do one from college basketball game last night that was kind of funny, if we have the opportunity, with Cam Smith, our producer. So why don't we try the Luka stuff? Because I actually have a hot take, or at least a thought about Luka Doncic, which is one of the reasons why.
He's been attacking the rim a lot more.
Here we go. Here's Luka.
Behind the back. In the corner. Kleber, same spot. He nails it.
Doncic nearly unstoppable tonight. Now AD's got him. He gets around him. Drive and kick along the three.
Unprecedented.
17 tonight. He's been attacking the rim a lot more for the Grizzlies. Taylor Jenkins said he's been doing a great job
taking that extra dribble that sometimes gets him into trouble and leads to turnovers.
Doncic, Gibson picks him up, finds Finney Smith open in the corner, and another three-pointer.
A machine.
Field, so he's looking to
every time he touches the ball, somebody
There.
scores, whether it's him or somebody else.
Finds Kleber in the corner, and he knocks down a three. Well, this kid's very good.
What's amazing about him is he's not just passing a pass. He's setting people up for wide open looks, and it's only when he doesn't have a look. So that's what's so extraordinary. And the vision, of course, is amazing. One more thing. Unbelievable game last night for all the wrong reasons, right? Notre Dame against Toledo. We've got a clip of that we're going to wrap up with today from the Notre Dame-Toledo game. So this was a charging foul. Notre Dame's in the white. And the guy in the white was called for a foul there. Right. This guy. That guy was called for a foul as he's falling down. Classic. Now, watch this sequence. It's the end of the game. Time is running out. Notre Dame's trying to tie the game. A three with 1.3 to go, and the ball gets stuck. Now, he was going to miss that shot, and Notre Dame was going to lose the game. he was going to miss that shot. Notre Dame was going to lose the game. But because the ball got stuck in there on the miss, Notre Dame got another chance to trigger it in and tie the game, which they did, tied the game. And they went on to win it in overtime. And what we missed there at the end, of course, we all missed, was Toledo threw up like a 75-foot shot at the buzzer that ended up going in. So you had the bizarre, I guess, charging foul. Then you have Notre Dame getting bailed. I've never seen that before. Notre Dame gets bailed out. They're down 3 points. They shoot up a three. It's going to miss. It's going to brick, but it gets stuck in the rim and wedged between the rim and the glass. And then Notre Dame's able to bring the ball back in and tie the game on a 3-pointer. So great job today by our producer, Cam Smith, coming through here in the bottom of the 9th inning, closing it out for us. Little Mariano Rivera action there with those 2 clips. Appreciate Howard Bryant of ESPN NPR and the book Full Dissident, which is coming out January 21st, 2020. He's H Bryant 42 on Twitter. Also, we were joined by the college football professor, Adam Clintock, who told us, and I believe him, Alabama's done. They're screwed. They're not going to make the college football playoff. He is CFB_professor, Adam McClintock. We'll bring him back as we get closer to the Final Four teams. And then moments ago, we had Bobby Burak at the big lead. It's Burak, how do you spell Burak? Burack, Bobby, one word, and then underscore. Never drink when you're cooking up your Twitter handle. I think Bobby may have had a couple of Jaeger bombs coming up with that sort of Twitter handle. So, but we're going to be back, of course, next week. We got the holidays coming up right around the corner. We're here every Monday through Friday, beginning at noon. You can expect more big name guests coming up next week. And so for our producer, Cam Smith from Los Angeles, this is Brooks Melchior saying so long from chilly LA, where we actually have the heat on. And this has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.